Hello and welcome to our Analyst Insights webinar featuring Advancing Zero Trust Priorities with Syxsense. Today, we have our industry experts, Graham Brooks and Chris Steffen, here to give us an inside look at advancing zero trust priorities. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and we'll reach out after to answer those. And with that, Graham and Chris.
Hey, Chris, great to have you on this session. This is definitely something a little bit different and new for us at Syxsense. For those of us who have been on one of our webcasts before, traditionally we kind of just give a strict overview of content where we kind of just describe how something works and kind of focus more on the discipline. Today, what we're wanting to do is something very different. We want to have just a conversation so that we can really dive into the depths of material and just discover new implementations, new thought processes along the way. To start that, I actually have a question for you that's going to kind of lead into the conversation. I understand that you have done a lot of work into researching implementations and functions within Zero Trust and lots of other cybersecurity frameworks and policies. In particular, you've been building out surveys to learn how different industry partners, different segments of the cybersecurity space are using, adopting, or avoiding Zero Trust solutions. And I just kind of wanted to start by asking you, what are some of the general findings that you've discovered along the way?
Yeah, thanks for the intro. And I've been doing a lot of Zero Trust stuff over the last few years. In fact, I'm actually the co-chair of the Zero Trust Working Group for the Cloud Security Alliance. In addition to every other thing that I do, I am such a firm believer in Zero Trust as a technology and as a practice in general. That I've been paying a lot of attention to it. So I shared with Syxsense and some of the research that I've kind of independently done as part of EMA, but also because I'm kind of just curious as to how people are implementing Zero Trust. And one of the biggest concerns that people have, because first of all, everybody's heard about it, right? I mean, there isn't, unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard about Zero Trust and the benefits of it and the government's implementation and so on and so forth. But I think that the one of the biggest concerns is, is this something that we can do? Is this something that, is this something only for a government agency? Is this something that you have to have, a security staff of 70 to be able to even try to get a hold of? And the answer is no, but there's a lot of misconceptions about that. And so even talking with, some of my comrades in the Zero Trust space, they'll tell you that we're making this too dang complicated. And John Kindervag, who's one of the guys who coined the term, is constantly preaching from the top of his lungs that, if you're making it overly complicated, you're never going to succeed. So
absolutely.
I always look at Zero Trust in general as it's a philosophy. It isn't a solution. It isn't a solution that is comprised of, these 6 things. And once you have these 6 things, you're Zero Trust. It just doesn't work that way. It's definitely one of those things where you want to take an incremental and simple approach. And quite frankly, it all starts with an evaluation of where you are to determine where you need to go and what you want to get out of it. So
and I really appreciate you mentioning that it's more of a philosophy, because my perspective, I spend all of my time on product adoption, helping people find the right product for a project. And I keep on having people come to me and saying, I have a project for Zero Trust. I need to find a product that's going to do Zero Trust for us. And I'm like, I can't help you. That's not what we do. I can help you understand Zero Trust so that we can figure out what the problem is so that we can start that process. But we need to have a first understanding before we can actually have that conversation.
Well, I think there's a lot of buzzword bingo out there too, where of course there's a lot of companies that want to take advantage of people not really understanding it and say, well, if you buy us, you have
Yeah.
a zero trust solution. Well, I'm here to tell you, I promise you that's not the case. I've been doing this for a long time. I have never heard of the all-in-one, out-of-the-box zero trust solution. And once you dig into what zero trust really means, you'd find out that that's not really possible anyway. So it is always good to kind of understand what it means, help people get into a zero trust mindset, and then from there figure out what capabilities they're looking for, so on and so forth. Again, you're hearing a lot of different security professionals and such that are out there, and they're getting feedback from their executive teams that are reading about it from wherever they're reading about it. And they could be getting pressure from, vendors or from, existing contracts or whatever have you, but they're like, well, we need to be zero trust tomorrow. I was like, well, okay, that doesn't work that way. So let's talk about what we can do to get you there.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is you can be zero trust tomorrow. The way you do that is get rid of all your computers, rid of your network stack, replace those stone tablets, and then put those stone tablets behind a locked gate, and then you will be zero trust. So
yeah, I mean that's about right. I mean, I can make any situation zero trust. You just can't ever touch anything that has to do with anything that has to do with a computer, right? So, but that's not reasonable. And so here in reality land, there are obviously things that you want to do to secure not only your environment, your people, your devices, but even kind of getting into that mindset as to what zero trust really means to you as an organization, and creating projects that help you get further down that path.
Totally. And I absolutely want to get into the details of your survey that you've done for zero trust. Before we do that, though, can you actually just give our audience a basic definition of zero trust?
Yeah, again, it depends on who you believe and who you talk to.
Sure.
But it really comes down to trust no one and verify everything. And you can make it as complicated as a definition as you want. At some point, people say you have to trust something, and that's relatively the truth, but it comes with the verification part too. Do I trust you, Graham, to do this, that, and the other thing? Well, after I verify that it's you, and we have an understanding that you're going to do these things based on your environment here and on these devices, then yeah, I'm going to trust you to be able to do that thing. If any one of those things is in question, be it your identity, be it your location, be it the device that you're in, whatever have you, then I'm going to trust you less, and you have the less ability to do some of those things. And so that, in a nutshell, is kind of what we're talking about here. You want to be able to understand, the from a policy perspective, what that person wants to do, how they want to do it, where they want to do it from, and really gain an understanding of why they want to do that. So
no, totally. What I have been telling my customers and partners when we talk about zero trust, essentially, and you can tell me if this is off base, but I explain it as a process of moving towards more organic form of authentication rather than kind of a static, brittle username, password, you have access. Now it's looking at the holistic user, device, location. It's the metadata experience. And when you take all of that in combination, that then determines access or not access and what level of access.
Yeah, that's right. And again, it's something that should be constantly evolving. You set a set of policies, but then once you set those policies, you're constantly adjusting them for different times. Let's take a very simple example. We all were obviously impacted by the pandemic. One day we were all very happily working in offices. The next day we never got to see an office again. And so your ability to take and do work on, intellectual property or proprietary information or protected information changed overnight. Well, now I have a relatively protected network here at my house that connects into, whatever data store that I was going to. But do I want to have the same amount of access if I am connecting through my local coffee shop? Do I want to have the same amount of access if I'm using a friend's computer? Do I want to have that same amount of access if I'm using that friend's computer while in a different country that has different regulations. And so all of these are different kind of things that you have to take into consideration. But the pandemic really focused on the idea that, having, some kind of data access is all part of, your zero trust infrastructure. It isn't just taking and authenticating that, yes, I'm Chris. It's yes, I'm Chris. I'm using this computer. I'm working on this stuff. I'm working from this location. I want to accomplish these things. And all those things in concert then kind of determine, whether it's appropriate for me to be doing that or not.
Right, totally. No, I hear that. And to your comment around the locationality of this conversation and what resources you're using, it kind of made me think about how a lot of IT admins, well, we're going to get into this in just a minute, but a lot of IT admins especially, they look at the Zero Trust project and they say, that's a lot of requirements. It's a whole lot of work that I'm going to have to manage. And if you look at it just from a spec sheet, yes, it can look like a lot of work. But I think long term, once Zero Trust is more adoptable and people have started moving towards it, we're actually going to find that it makes things easier. Because I think the products that are supporting Zero Trust are going to have to evolve to be more organic to support the model. And I think that's going to allow people to have more real-time control instead of these massive static projects that take months to perform.
I totally agree. I mean, again, I would argue even organically, if you look at the projects that you have on your plate right now as a CISO, as a security professional, and even as an IT admin, many of them have a zero trust component already. So let's take one, again, top of everybody's list, whether you want it to be or not, you likely have some kind of compliance infrastructure controls that you have to deal with, be it, something as basic as PCI to something as complicated as, FedRAMP High to everything in between. And all of those are reasons. In fact, you talked about the survey that we did. Compliance, IT compliance and auditing were one of the primary reasons, with almost 20% of those that were surveyed that basically said, we're looking at Zero Trust to help us with our audit and compliance related infrastructure. Again, no big surprise there. Let's look at another simple one. Everybody has heard about, CCPA and GDPR requirements for data security. Again, another perfect example of why you would take and be looking at data classification and data security as part of your overall Zero Trust project. And you can go straight on down the line here, right? From antivirus to, EDR to your SIM solution to, authentication to user management. All of them are relevant. I'm not saying that any of them are not relevant. I'm saying when you take and add them all together, now all of a sudden you have the major components that you would be looking at when you're talking about Zero Trust and the reason behind them, right? So when I say, when we started this conversation, I said that one of the first things you need to do when you're looking at Zero Trust is evaluate where you are. Evaluate what projects you have done, evaluate projects you are going to do, and figure out how that takes and falls into your overall Zero Trust scheme when it's all said and done. And again, most people do. Most people have some kind of multi-factor authentication. Most people have some sense of data security. Most people already have some sense of device management, so on and so forth. And so when you take and look at all those things together and figure out how they are implemented and how they're all connected, then you find out really where you are as part of your Zero Trust project. And you find out that, hey, yes, this is a big damn deal, but guess what? We're already, if you take the euphemistic, there's 20 steps, we're not at step 0. We're at step 11 or 12 or 15. And if we implement, just a couple more controls or a little bit change here and whatever else, now all of a sudden we're really making big headway into getting some of these things done.
Right. No, that's totally fair. So looking at this list, we have IT compliance, talk through FedRAMP or PCI at the other end of the extreme. Do you agree that it should be at the top of that list? Do you think that is being driven by competency or bureaucracy? And yes, I do put them at opposite ends of the spectrum.
You see, ironically, you do, but you don't, right? Because those things do drive a lot of our controls and so on and so forth. And I'll add another one to the same list. When you start talking about regulatory controls from IT compliance, you also have to put in their vendor due diligence controls, right? So, it isn't just the government agencies that are requiring that you have two-factor authentication. If you are let's say that you're Bob's Big Bank and Trust. Now Bob's Big Bank and Trust has 11 government agencies that require some sort of regulation that come behind them. If you're in the healthcare industry, you have all the HIPAA related controls. And each industry has their own set of controls that are interesting. And then if you do business with one of those entities, again, let's say that you're doing business with Bob's Big Bank and Trust, there's a pretty good chance that something that I've coined a long time ago, passed down chance, that because you are business with Bob's Big Bank and Trust, that you're going to have a security policy. You're going to have to comply with a number of these controls that Bob Big Bank and Trust has to in order to continue doing business with them. So that pass down compliance idea is also another big part of when it's all said and done.
Yeah, no, totally. And kind of as an aside there, Syxsense, we do a lot of cybersecurity projects with people. They have a problem and we help them resolve it. The number of people that I have worked with who've come to us because they were part of a supply chain breach has been dramatically increasing over the last couple of years. So I hear that, and it is definitely reality right now that it's not just you, it's everyone that you work with. You need to be validating not just your own trust for your internal resources, but also the trust relationships you have with other vendors and suppliers as well.
I'll give you a contrived example, and it sounds ridiculous, but it's absolutely true. Let's say that you are Henry's House of Paperclips, and you've been making paperclips since the time of George Washington, and but you want to do business with Bob's Big Bank and Trust. Well, they come in and you've had a relationship with them for a gazillion years. Well, now all of a sudden they're coming back and say, well, we need to see your security plan. We need to see whatever. And as Henry House of Paperclips, you've never had to deal with any of that because, again, you make paperclips. But now all of a sudden you find, that Bob's Big Bank and Trust is concerned that the three computers that you have that accidentally connect into their network are vulnerable to any kind of attack in the world. So there is a reasonable expectation that you have some kind of security controls around those computers. Do you really need that kind of computer horsepower to make a paperclip? I don't know, probably not. And maybe some IoT there, whatever. But the reality of it is that isn't what their concern is. Their concern is that you're connecting into their systems, and now all of a sudden you have to make certain that you are protected as well. And let's we haven't really talked about it, but let's talk about a reputational problem, right? Let's say that there's a breach at Henry's House of Paperclips. Does it really have an impact on Bob's Big Bank and Trust? And the answer is very possibly, right? So those are all things that Bob Big Bank and Trust has to keep in mind and consider when taking it and looking at what controls they're requiring their vendors to implement and adhere to.
Oh yeah, it's huge. A really easy example of that, you mentioned connecting into Bob's big banking system. They have the computer connection. You don't even need that. You have, as a company, access to W-9 information for other companies you work with. And so just by having a relationship with money exchanged, if you get breached and you're the little guy, and you do business with the big guy, you have their banking information. And that information is now someone else's information that they're selling on the dark web.
That's right. So, absolutely.
My question there then, where you said they should start by understanding their existing projects, but if you're a tiny paperclip manufacturing company, where do you start in actually building a zero trust framework? I'm thinking 1-man, 2-man max IT shops. What does that look like?
Yeah, so let's talk that through because there's some interesting ways to take and look at zero trust in general. I would argue that every company of every size gains benefit by taking and looking at the controls around taking and going with some kind of zero trust project. But there's two ways to look at it, and it's important to remember this. If you are, the 50,000 employee company, so on and so forth. You have plenty of resources. You go out there. Maybe you even hire a project manager that's going to help you do your evaluation, and you get through it. If you are Henry's House of Paperclips and you have that one IT guy, this is where it's okay to phone a friend. Call your MSSP, and quite frankly, talk to the companies that you're doing business with. They can likely nominate somebody to be able to help you as well. Find out who they're talking to, find out who they recommend, and use that information to have help taking and going through this. Not everybody has the skills in-house to be able to implement zero trust. I promise you. I mean, unfortunately, it is a complicated thing. I think that we make it overly complicated sometimes. We don't need to be doing that, but that's what ends up happening. And again, that is just the nature of what happens. But I say all of that. It is perfectly okay to find somebody that is that CISSP, that is that zero trust expert, that is that vendor that's going to help you with that, understanding what you have in place and understanding what your next steps are going to be. You don't have to do it alone.
Okay, here's a one-off side question, just so we can put some meat on the framework of the definition we built. If you're tiny and you don't have much, you've got, let's give this company some resources. They've got some laptops. They don't even have servers. They don't need servers. They've got like a couple HMI devices that connect to the machines that stamp those paper clips. That's it. What would zero trust look like for them?
Yeah, it could be very simple. I mean, it could be something as simple as gaining a better understanding of the devices that you have in place, how those devices are secured. It could be understanding the 10 employees of your company and what kind of access that they need. It could be something as simple as understanding of where your data is stored and how your data is secured. It could be understanding how you are connecting to what other networks and what other devices, and it could finally be evaluating that risk, putting it down on paper, understanding what that plan looks like, and presenting it to the leadership of your company. Again, I know that sounds really complicated. It really isn't. It is really straightforward, and it doesn't necessarily need to be any more complicated than that. And once you have an understanding of those things, then you can decide the next step. Maybe you want to take and have a little bit different data security, or you decide you want to put your data in a different place. Maybe you decide you want to invest in an API security project. Maybe you decide you want to have better authentication and use some kind of token-based authentication for the 10 employees that you have. But my point being is that once you understand where you are, and again, you're talking about 10 people, once you understand where you and those 10 people are, then you could go to the next step and say, incrementally, here's what makes sense for 2023 for us to take and implement. And then once we do that and we see some benefit, maybe we'll do the next thing. And then we do the next thing. And so, like I said, it's iterative. It's not something that you're going to accomplish by taking and buying, the zero trust solution all at once from, zerotrust.com or something like that. It just doesn't work that way. This is determining your risk, understanding what the benefits are of taking and implementing some of these different technologies, and then proceeding forward until you do the next thing.
Okay, so I have two steps right here. I've got data survey. So you're going through or looking for data points. What do I know about what I have? And then from that information, you're turning that into a risk evaluation. So you can understand the problems associated with how things are architected today. And then 3, you mentioned previously, I think this is the next step, would be take what you've learned, what you know about your environment, present it to people, partners potentially, maybe MSP or MSSP, who can then give you informed intelligence on what to do with the information that you've learned. Is that kind of fair for that small org?
Yeah, and I guess I would add one other step that I should have mentioned right from the very beginning. You probably should not be implementing zero trust unless there is some reason to be doing it, and that reason likely is that you have controls that you need to deal with. You're trying to improve your security, which is great. That's a great reason in and of itself. But people don't generally take and implement security for giggles and grins. You're doing it because you're doing it because you want to gain something for it. So
Yep.
if you have a set of controls that a vendor is passing down to you, if you have a set of regulatory compliance controls that you need to adhere to, then you want to take those as part of your overall risk evaluation to determine where your gaps are and going forward from there.
Well, and to that point, a lot of times in the cybersecurity space, people see cybersecurity as a restriction, a shackle on their ankle, pulling them back from what they want. And something that I've been trying to educate people into is the understanding that cybersecurity can actually make you money for your company in new contracts. So if you have a robust or even adequate cybersecurity policy, and the other paperclip manufacturer doesn't, and you want to do business with an organization that has just straight requirements for all of their vendors, you're going to have a better time getting that contract than the other guy who doesn't. Seen this plenty of times with our customers when they start adopting platforms for security through Syxsense and through other vendors. So I just want to make sure for people listening that you don't have to just look at this as subtracting from your bottom line. This can also be used to leverage and support your bottom line and moving forward.
Yeah, and I would even add to that, and it wasn't really in the survey that we're talking about here, but in a number of other surveys that I've done, people talking about their compliance status and from a data security perspective, but just regulatory compliance in general as being a competitive differentiator, right?
Yeah.
When you start saying, and ironically, 5-6 years ago, this was a laughable conversation, but if I can come to you and go to the marketing team and basically say, we are going to tout that we have better data security than all of our other competitors combined, and that our data security, what we do with your data is foremost, right? We want to make certain that your data is protected above all else. Well, depending on your industry, that could be an interesting differentiator, right? That could be something that makes Bob consumer decide to go with you over your competitor, because you have highlighted something that is of a critical nature to them. And now all of a sudden it is starting to be more and more of critical nature to most of the general public. You're hearing more and more about it. So again, that when you start talking about, competitive differentiators, zero trust and having a robust data security and zero trust plan, all of a sudden becomes kind of interesting in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Wholeheartedly agree with that. Slight anecdote there. You see it with Apple on the consumer hardware and software space. This isn't an endorsement or anything like that, but they present themselves as a security first vendor, and a lot of people really like that. And I think they've done very well because of that posture. Whereas other organizations, I think, have had to attempt to become like Apple rather than having that as a first principle, which I think has been really a boon for them.
Well, and then you can take it the other way too. You can look at those companies that are having breaches. I'm not going to mention names, but I think that we all saw in the news, even in the last week or so, there was a huge breach by one of the major telcos. They lost 37 million records, and how does that really impact the bottom line? I take some of that with a grain of salt, because you hear about it so much that people are almost becoming, desensitized to it. But at the same time, at some point, you do have, it always does linger in the back of your mind, is this telco going to, protect my data? Then you start talking about things that are truly important to you as an individual. Is my bank protecting my information? When you hear about, again, Bob's Big Bank and Trust has a huge data breach. Is that a concern for you? And we've heard it with some of the payment processors. We've heard it with some of the credit card companies. We've heard it with even some of the mobile payment options, right? And so that's a big concern, right? Because everybody uses this stuff, and everybody wants to make certain that you're using this stuff. Well, the stuff that you use every day, when it works, it's fine. It's when it doesn't work that you freak out and the whole world comes to a screeching halt.
Yeah. And I will just throw this out there. I don't know that zero trust is going to be the one fix for every scenario. And adoption is also going to be plagued with the things you didn't catch during your data survey and your risk evaluation. Where I'm going with that is, okay, so you've got an environment that you're securing. You're implementing zero trust policies. You've got the metadata evaluation to decide whether a connection is allowed or not. But part of that, it has to be, I don't know, reestablished over time. You're constantly reevaluating and checking, because maybe today your zero trust controls are perfect, but tomorrow you got hacked anyways, and maybe it was because you didn't find something during that initial data survey. I'm actually got a specific example in mind. I'm thinking of the Colonial Pipeline. Was that
Yep.
last year, when they had a simple breach just because of a VPN connection that had a bad password that was, I think, bought off the dark web. Maybe my memory's not right, but there wasn't any true hack. It was just connecting unallowed, which is part of zero trust. So when we talk about building solutions, what does it look like to reevaluate over time? Do you have any recommendations on how to ensure that the thing that you're building today is going to still be integral and still be functioning 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road?
Yeah, it's one of constant evaluation, right? You know, we're solving some of those with automation, even to the point where you're taking and building policies and such when you get new data stores and what have you, to make certain that they are protected correctly. But it is something that you have to constantly be evaluated. One of my biggest gripes about PCI is point in time. So many of the breaches that you hear are, well, we've passed our PCI compliance yesterday, and then, you know, the next day you had a breach. Well, it's because you let everything go to hell the next day, right? And so you hear that over and over and over and over again. It's something that takes constant reevaluation. And so the great part about zero trust and the zero trust philosophy, it isn't one and done. It is a constant evaluation of your risk and your trust vision and philosophy, and it has to constantly be evolving. There is no such thing as static technology. Your technological environment is constantly evolving. Every time that you make any sort of change at all in your environment, whether that be adding a device, adding a new data store, adding even a new person, you have to be reevaluating how that trust relationship is going to look. And so part of the zero trust philosophy is always evaluating and always updating and so on and so forth. It is not a point in time solution.
What you're saying is starting to sound a little bit like DevOps. Am I wrong? This is like that DevSecOps continuous integration stuff.
You're not wrong either, because you are taking and constantly taking and doing iterative development. You're constantly taking and doing iterative evaluation as to what's going on. And in the perfect security world, that's what you're doing always, right? In the perfect risk world, you're never resting on the risk evaluation that you did yesterday, because new risks have evolved today. Does it make you a paranoid, crazy person? Yes, it does, right? But it doesn't change the fact that your risk over time is going to change. And whether that time frame is from today till tomorrow, from to tomorrow to next week, from to next week to next month, it doesn't change the fact that things in your environment are likely going to change, at least incrementally, that might involve taking and reevaluating how you are going to have your environment.
And I think that in of itself is why, hopefully appropriate, zero trust implementations where people take it seriously and continue with that iterative improvement process, I think it's going to be really helpful, because I talk to a lot of people. Usually our conversation starts with, I've got a project for PCI compliance or HIPAA compliance or SOX compliance, and I need a tool that's going to help me meet the benchmark requirements. And generally what I see from these projects is, okay, we used Syxsense, we got compliant. Okay, story's over, we're done. We move on to the next project. And yeah, there is always going to be the next project, but the story doesn't end once you get that certificate in the mail. It's a continual thing. I think that with zero trust, we're going to start seeing organizations by default having the baseline requirements of other certification structures met. Is that a fair assessment,
It is. Let me
okay.
also say too, there are two kinds of people who look at compliance, right? You
Right.
have the people over here, and this isn't a shot at anybody listening to this conversation, but I promise you there are these people on this call right now on this webinar that have what we call checkbox compliance.
Yeah.
We needed to do these 8 things. We did them. We're done. We're moving on, right? And that's fine. I mean, that's not the philosophy that I personally believe in, but sometimes you got to pay the bills and you got to do what you got to do, and that's what's going to happen. Zero Trust is not designed to be a checkbox compliant solution. Zero Trust is that other side, this company over here that does those 8 things, and then here's how we're going to reevaluate these next 8 things, and here's how the process is going to look at here again, and then let's take and be compliance ready all the time, no matter what, so that an auditor could come in on a Thursday afternoon and say, can you show me evidence of X, Y, and Z? And you said, boom, here you go. Not a problem. Anytime you're ready. I have been in that environment. I have been in an audit ready in an environment. We had 63 audits one year. It was a financial services company. And
right.
So when I say we were audit ready, we were audit ready. We were audit ready 24/7, 365. We didn't really have a choice. We had to be that way. And so, but it also takes constant evaluation and making certain that everybody, including your executive management, by the way, believes in the philosophy of being audit ready all the time, because it generally doesn't come for free. You have to spend at least time and resources on being that way. It also usually requires tools. It requires that constant evaluation. So it does take effort, but depending on how regulated you are, it does take and reap huge benefits that you aren't having this mass panic every time that you're having an audit. So again, those are the two kinds of scenarios you're talking about: the checkbox people and the constant audit ready people. Zero Trust is made for these people. The audit ready people, that is what Zero Trust is created for. The checkbox compliance people, you should strive to be audit ready. And that's really what our goals are always going to be.
Totally. Quick anecdote. From personal experience, I recommend if you're a checkbox compliance person, you're trying to meet PCI or HIP or whatever other requirements you have, aim for 98, 99% compliance. Do not aim for 100%. And also don't show 100% compliance, because that's how you get a much deeper dive audit. Yes, 100% is a good goal, but it's not realistic. And also, it's going to get a lot more investigation than if you could show we're well above the threshold, but we didn't whitewash anything. Because often when I look at an environment and I see 100% compliance, I say, wow, you cleaned your room real well last night. This doesn't actually look like a real live environment to me. Okay, Chris, another question, because you're talking about evaluations. What does it look like from a security leadership perspective when you're talking to the C-suite? How would you present like KPIs and performance for your team in a zero trust environment? Because generally, the C-suite, they're looking for those checkbox compliance things. They look for, did you do the project and is it done? I feel like zero trust is kind of a different mode because there is no done state. Am I wrong?
No, you're not. So again, two ways of looking at it. One, you need to show the value of zero trust, and the value comes with being, in a better readiness state of security and compliance just in general. And there's 100 different ways to demonstrate that. We were also talking a little earlier about being audit ready. I promise you that your compliance and your risk team really will appreciate you being audit ready. And as most of those positions, your chief compliance officer usually reports directly to your board of directors. That will be very interesting to them. I will also say that, like we were mentioning before, if you can demonstrate it as a competitive differentiator in your space, that is also very interesting. There are two types of people in an organization: those who spend money and those who make money, right? Rare is the day that your security team is going to be making you money, but the end goal is for your security team not to be costing you
Yes.
overly amounts of money. And that
Yep.
comes from being able to demonstrate that you're not going to have security holes, that you are audit ready, that you have addressed these, relationship concerns with your vendors, whatever have you. And if you can do those things and be a valued member of, your overall business process, that's how you demonstrate to your executive team, to your business leaders, the value of security and why zero trust is important.
Okay. No, totally. On that specific point, I used to work in manufacturing. That's where I came from. IT, analytics in manufacturing. And something that I learned from the floor team is this idea that what you measure, you improve. So would you say from a leadership perspective, the measurement for improvement should be your day-to-day? Would you say that it's the frequency that you pass your audits? What do you think the primary measurement of success for a zero trust solution looks like?
Yeah, I had a former boss that was actually quite terrible. That had a scanner, and it literally said, here are your criticals, here are your mediums, here are your greens, here are your informationals, just like you would expect in a variety of different scanners out there.
Sure.
And my performance was directly measured on how many criticals that I had, so on and so forth. And the irony, and I tried to explain this to them a billion times, is that it would change during the day, and therefore they felt that I wasn't doing my job. And what I couldn't explain to them, I explained to them a million times, is the reason it changed during the day is that we made updates that changed the environment, and now we're remediating the updates so that eventually we would have zero. When I started there, we had over 400 different controls that we were that were broken. By the time that I left there, we only had 21. And so did that have progress? For sure. Is that the way you should be measuring it? No, because
you were terrible at your job because there are fewer emergencies.
Yeah, and so what I was trying to get across to them is that the security of our company was radically improving day after day after day after day, and I can show you where we were having less breaches, where we were having less trouble tickets, where we were having less incidents based on these things. Those are the things that I care about. Whether it's a red, yellow, green control that hasn't been remediated yet,
right,
that's great, but at the end of the day, that didn't really have any impact on the overall function and viability of the company. And so it's important for a security professional to have the wherewithal to use those dashboards and use information to present to their business leadership as to the benefit of zero trust and their security program in general. And if you can get buy-in from the business and be an active part in the business process, that's where you really do end up winning when it's all said and done.
Right. No, totally. Going back a little bit in our conversation where we're talking about the stages of implementation for zero trust. Let's assume that we've got an organization that's building their zero trust platform and solution. What would you say is the hardest part of that? Where do you see breakdowns?
Every single time it's at the evaluation and planning part, right?
Okay.
And so you either don't do that, you just implement because that was the cool thing to implement, or you don't have an adequate investigation as to what's actually going on. Let's just take a component. Let's take data security.
Yeah.
Taking and encrypting your data is easy. Okay. That is not a hard process at all. Knowing what your data is, where your data is, and who needs to have access to that data is extraordinarily hard. And then the next step is who owns the data to begin with. Okay. Before you ever encrypt the first thing, you got to know where everything is. And I promise you, even if you are an organization of 10 or 12 people, there is a very strong likelihood that you don't know where all your data resides. You think you do. And everybody is telling you that you think you do, but the reality is that somebody has a thumb drive squirreled away somewhere. Somebody has an S3 bucket that they're doing testing with. Somebody has this little OneDrive store that they're putting, critical information that they need on their daily basis that you don't know about. there is information squirreled away in places that you just don't know. And so how can you realistically do an evaluation on how you're going to secure that data when you don't know where all that data is? Once you know where all the data is, supposedly, then you can start taking and going through the process of data classification and data ownership and whatever have you.
Mm-hmm.
But until you do that evaluation of your data estate, it's very, very hard to do. Let's cross-apply that back to zero trust. It cross-applies the same way. You need to understand what you're trying to protect, what your goals are, where you are today. And once you understand what those things are, then you can start taking and doing an implementation based on those goals and based on those risks. Without really understanding those things, and by the way, that's not a one and done thing either. That's something that needs to be constantly reevaluated as well. But once you understand those things, then you can start the process of figuring out what is the low-hanging fruit to implement. What's the next step past that? What is, and what does it mean to be completed? And by the way, that's a trick question because you aren't going to be completed. So, understanding what that's really going to look like long-term is really
as you're talking through this, Chris, something that keeps on ringing in my head is a question. It's a good question. It's very valuable from a previous manager. What does done look like? And I'm like, okay, yes, for a lot of things, but done kind of doesn't have a definition that I can think of for zero trust because it is that iterative, constant improvement process. And I think the closest, and you can tell me if I'm crazy, the closest we can get to done is on a daily basis, you are able to ensure compliance to the standard. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's true, right? I mean, I firmly believe that you have to have milestones that you say that you've completed. And I think that, quote unquote done is different for every organization. Have you met all your goals? Are you complying with all the regulations that you need to? Are you complying with your vendor due diligence requirements? Are you seeing, any kind of massive breaches or anything like that? If you can answer, affirmatively to all those questions in a positive way, then maybe you are done. But it isn't done as in done, let's move on to the next thing. It's done. Now you're at a stable state. Let's take and continue that process iteratively and make certain that we're there. But the great thing about zero trust, or maybe not great, depending on your perspective, is that done also means that everything is secure as you can possibly and reasonably make it. And therefore, there's always the next thing. I would always preface that by saying it's as secure as you need it to be, not as secure as it has to be. So, and what the difference is there is that we were joking at the beginning of this webinar about I can take and give you a stone tablet, stick it in a locked box in a locked room, and it'll be as secure as whatever, but it's not usable. But with the 12 people that work at Henry's House of Paperclips, have we met all those requirements? Have we updated everything? Do we have a plan in place? Are we constantly evaluating? I think it's safe to say that they are done and have done what they needed to do to be able to meet those requirements without spending a gazillion dollars to do things that they don't have to do. I mean, again, security shouldn't be an impediment to taking in and getting things done and doing work for your business. And every dollar that you're spending on security, in theory, is a dollar that you're not spending on your business. So I'm never that guy that says that you have to spend, every red cent that you have on taking and improving your security. I am a believer in businesses taking and doing business, and by the way, doing business in a secured way.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, this has been awesome. This is a lot of really good content, and frankly,
great discussion.
I would love to have more of these.
Yeah.
We are almost out of time. If you are either on this live stream or watching it after the fact, you are absolutely welcome to reach out to me, Graham, at Syxsense.com, and I'd be happy to support you. We can start building out that data survey, risk evaluation, and then next steps as you figure out what zero trust looks like for your organization. And Chris, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really good session. And do you have any final thoughts you want to convey?
No, well, I mean, yes, and thank you. I guess I would say a couple things. One, Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. It's obviously something that we could talk about, until the cows come home.
Yeah.
It is a journey. It is not something you're going to implement overnight, but keep in mind, there are plenty of people that are out there interested to help you. Syxsense will, I certainly will. In my job in the Cloud Security Alliance, that's what we do. We try to give people, great information. You can engage me through that. I'm also on LinkedIn too. Feel free to, join me there as well. And again, I look forward to the chance of being able to continue these kind of chats and educate people about the benefits of zero trust.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. It's been
Absolutely.
great.
Thank you.
Cool. Cheers, everyone.